Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're exploring 3 stories of people who were inside their own homes. The one place where we're supposed to feel safe, yet ended up living through absolutely traumatic experiences. If you've been around the channel for a while, you've probably heard me say that these are some of my favorite kinds of stories. For me, there's nothing scarier than the contrast between the safety of your own home and something, or someone, invading it. And if it all happens in the middle of a storm, even better. As always, thank you so much for being here and for keeping this channel alive. Your support means more than you could ever imagine. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. There are traumatic moments that have the ability to distort our sense of time, and this was one of them for me. This happened a little over 3 years ago, but many times it feels like it was only yesterday. At the time, I lived alone in a 1-story ranch house at the edge of a quiet, rural town in West Virginia. It was the kind of place with long stretches of empty fields between houses and a single road in or out. If you've ever heard of this part of the country, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are areas that aren't just a little isolated. They're genuinely forgotten in the middle of nowhere. The house itself was small and plain, but it was mine, and since I had bought it with my own money, I loved it. 2 bedrooms, a narrow hallway that led to the kitchen and living room, and a crawl space under the floor that I never really used. The best part of the house for me was the backyard, which pointed directly at the forest. It was early autumn and the nights were starting to get cold. In fact, on this particular night it was raining heavily outside, and I loved that. I was comfortable and warm inside the house listening to the rainfall. That evening had been uneventful. I'd made dinner, done some work on my laptop, and then just drifted into scrolling on my phone. By around 10, the entire place was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge and the rain outside. Outside, it was pitch black. No streetlights out there, just a thin moon. After dark, no one goes out in this area, and because of that, if you look outside, the feeling of isolation is even stronger. One thing that's important to say is that even though we live in a small community where we all know each other and trust one another, everyone locks their windows and doors after dark. There are countless myths about creatures from the forest that can enter your home if you don't lock your doors. Not that I believed in those things, but just the act of locking everything gave me a sense of security. So by this time, I had already locked the doors and windows. I remember glancing at the time, 10:42 p.m., the time I usually went to bed. I had just closed my eyes when I heard it. A dull, slow scrape along the siding of the house. Not like wind, not like an animal. A long, deliberate drag of something hard against the outer wall. I held my breath and waited, but it stopped as suddenly as it had started. The rain continued to fall heavily. After a minute of silence, I told myself it had to be a tree branch or maybe some animal brushing by. potentially some animal trying to protect itself from the rain. So I rolled over, trying to ignore it. Maybe 10 minutes passed before I heard a faint metallic sound from the kitchen. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. The subtle shift of a lock or a handle. This could no longer be an animal, so my heart started pounding, and I sat up, straining to listen. Another soft noise followed, like someone stepping carefully across the tile floor. I couldn't ignore it. No one had ever entered my house before, but I had no doubt someone had come in. I wasn't alone anymore. I slipped out of bed, bare feet, and crept to the bedroom door. My house had no creaky floors, but even then, I moved as lightly as possible. Probably something we all do instinctively. Then I leaned out into the hallway. It was completely dark except for the faint glow of the router in the living room. I stayed there for what felt like forever. The only sound was the rain outside and my own heartbeat. Then, from the far end of the hall, near the kitchen, came a slow, deliberate breath. This was really happening. Someone was inside my house. My brain was processing this information without truly processing it. I shut my bedroom door as quietly as I could, locked it, and backed toward the window. My phone was still on the nightstand. I grabbed it and immediately dialed 911. Then I crouched down, listening. I knew I was in a part of the country where the police probably never got called or where it would take forever for them to arrive. Still, I said what I needed to say, and on the other end, they told me a police car was already on its way. They'd take 37 minutes to get there. It was too long. I was going to have to deal with this on my own. The sound of steps began moving down the hallway. Slow, careful, like whoever it was knew I was there. They had probably heard me talking. They reached the door of my bedroom and stopped right in front of it. Then a faint sound of fingers brushing against the door frame. Whoever was on the other side was taking their time. They knew the police would take a while to get there, and so they could take as long as they wanted. But I was terrified of running into the woods. Years earlier, something had happened to me out there at night, and just the thought of fleeing in that direction made my stomach knot. Now, I had to choose between running into the forest and whatever lived there, or staying and facing whoever was on the other side of the door. That's when a third option came to me. The roof of my house sat relatively low compared to the window. I could throw something out the window to make it look like I'd run that way, then climb out and hide on the roof. I just had to make as little noise as possible. My one advantage was the rain. It was coming down in sheets at that hour, and maybe the noise would cover the sound of me moving across the shingles. On top of that, I'd always been small and light. Maybe that would help too. So that's what I did. While the person on the other side of the door was clearly trying to open it, I grabbed one of my jackets and threw it out the window. Then, holding on with more strength than I thought I had, I pulled myself up onto the roof of my house. The relief of not falling was enormous. I just lay flat on the shingles, the rain drenching me completely as my heart pounded 1,000 beats per minute from the adrenaline. I didn't know if whoever had entered would find me there. I had no way of moving without making noise, so I just stayed there until in the distance I heard the police car. It was a big scene. All the neighbors peeking through their windows. Some braver and closer ones coming over to me and asking what had happened. I could barely explain. My body felt absolutely frozen from the rain I'd caught and from the shock of being so close to something terrible happening. But what scared me the most was when one of the officers pulled me aside and explained that they believed it had been one of my neighbors. The back door of the house had been found open. Whoever had come in had done so using a key. Someone among them had seen me there alone and thought it was the perfect opportunity to take advantage of me. Since then, 3 years have passed and I still live in the same house. Nothing else has happened, but the truth is I suspect one of my neighbors. He's always behaved somewhat strangely toward me, and I avoid being alone with him as much as possible. I don't want to be unfair, so I've never mentioned anything to anyone. Not even told that the police suspected one of them. The community is small and loves gossip. Accepting that it was someone from outside, or some creature from the forest, is easier. Even so, I took all the precautions. I installed a new security system with cameras. I changed all the locks and reinforced the windows. I know I'm safe, but from time to time, I'm still afraid something might happen, that I might slip up, and that it could lead to the worst. I was 25 when this happened, and I had just moved back to West Virginia after living in Ohio for a few years. Money was tight, and I was doing odd jobs through Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist. Cleaning barns, dog sitting, small repairs, anything that paid cash. One evening, a man named John reached out. He said he owned a small farm about 40 minutes from my town and needed someone to feed and water his animals for a week while he was away on business. It sounded simple enough. He offered $500 cash up front, which was way more than what I usually made. When I drove out there the first time to meet him, the place was way more isolated than I expected. The gravel driveway went on for what felt like a mile, with no houses in sight. The barn was old, painted a dull red, and the farmhouse was small but neat. John was maybe mid-50s, heavy-set, wearing a faded Carhartt jacket. He talked slowly with a kind of rehearsed politeness that felt off, but not enough to make me leave. People who live that isolated often have quirks. He showed me the chores: a few goats, some chickens, and a horse in a back pasture. He said I'd be sleeping in a little guest room in the farmhouse to keep an eye on things, since there'd been break-ins in the area. He handed me a ring of keys and told me which doors to lock at night. The only thing that made me a little suspicious was how easily he just handed everything over to me, without really talking to me or trying to get to know me. He just put the house keys straight in my hands. The first night was uneventful. I fed the animals, locked up the barn, then went inside. The guest room was tiny, just a twin bed, a dresser, and a small window looking out toward the barn. The second night was different. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a faint clanging sound coming from outside. I sat up and listened. It sounded like the barn door latch. I told myself it had to be the weather. I'd gone to bed with just some rain and wind, but now it was pouring hard. It was pure luck that I heard the sound over the rain at all. When I looked out the window, I could barely make out the barn in the dark, but I swear the main door was moving slightly, like it hadn't been shut all the way. It was absolutely pouring, and the last thing I wanted to do was get out of bed. I made a mental note to check the latch the next day and fix it if needed. But then I felt guilty. After all, the job I'd been given wasn't hard, but it included exactly this. making sure everything was fine. I grabbed the flashlight John left for me and slipped on my boots. Outside, the rain was even heavier, and the only thing I could hear as I walked was the sound of my boots splashing through water. When I finally reached the barn, the door was shut tight. I pulled on it and it didn't budge. I stood there for a moment, scanning the fields around me. Nothing but black shapes of trees and the faint sound of goats shifting inside their pen. I wasn't about to stand there in the rain, so I went back in, locked the door behind me, took a quick shower so I wouldn't go to bed soaked, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there. John had told me that someone had been sneaking onto the property lately. That was why he'd hired me, and I had definitely seen that door swinging open. When I got there, it was shut. The latch wasn't something that could have closed itself from the rain. The door might have come open for a million reasons: bad weather, my own carelessness. But for it to close again after I'd seen it open? That was definitely a human hand. The next day was all about trying to figure out if someone had been there and fixing some of the things the rain had messed up. It was still raining, but not as hard as at night. But I didn't find any sign that anyone had been there. If there had been footprints, the rain had already washed them away. By the third night, I felt like something was off inside the house. Something I hadn't noticed before and knew wasn't me. It smelled like sweat, but an acidic, weird kind of sweat. At first I thought maybe something had gone bad in the kitchen or there was dirty laundry somewhere. But I couldn't find anything. The smell seemed to be in the living room, the bedrooms, the kitchen, everywhere. After I finished the main chores, I double-checked every window and door, even the ones John said nobody ever uses. Then I sat on the living room couch, thinking about what it could be. I already knew that if I went to bed, I wasn't going to sleep. Around midnight, I went upstairs to the guest room and laid down, scrolling on my phone, when I noticed the air vent above the closet. It was small, about the size of a shoebox lid, with a newer metal grate than the rest of the room. Something about it caught my attention. The screws looked shiny, like it had just been installed. I knew this because I'd noticed the ones in the kitchen were old and dirty and needed cleaning. I'd even made a mental note to clean some of them the next day to make a good impression on John. That's how I knew this one was different. Brand new. I stood up to get a closer look. Through the slats, I could see a faint glint. Glass reflecting light. I pulled a chair over to the closet and climbed on it for a better view. My heart dropped. Something was in there, glued to the slats, and it looked exactly like a tiny camera lens. I unscrewed the grate as fast as I could and confirmed my suspicion. Inside was a small black device wired to a battery pack. The lens was pointed directly at the bed. I climbed down and just stood there holding it, my mind racing. Why on earth would John put a camera in that exact spot? I mean, I could have understood if there were cameras in other parts of the house. After all, he didn't know me and maybe wanted to make sure I wasn't stealing anything. But a camera aimed straight at my bed. That made no sense. Or actually, it did, if his intentions were completely twisted. I felt furious, violated. Not because I'd done anything in that bed, but because just the thought of someone watching me at my most vulnerable while I slept was sickening. At that point, it didn't even cross my mind that I might not be alone in the house. I assumed he was gone and was just watching me remotely. I started going through every single room, trying to find proof that something really bad was going on there. room by room, my heart pounding harder with each door I opened. When I reached the main bedroom, the one that belonged to John, I noticed a square in the ceiling, clearly leading to an attic. I pushed it open, my hands shaking, and what I found up there left me completely stunned. He was in there, curled up in a corner like he was scared I'd lose it, which, honestly, I probably looked like I would. The tiny attic had 2 monitors streaming a live feed of my bed, and the walls were covered with photos of other people lying in beds. It was sick. I started yelling at him, calling him a coward, telling him to face me, but he just stayed crouched there like he was ashamed of what he'd done. I left right then, even though it was pouring rain outside. The next morning, I called the police and reported everything. What they told me floored me. They already knew something was going on. They'd gotten another complaint, just like mine before, but there was never any proof and nothing they could do. Still, I begged them to go there, to check the attic. I assume they did, but I never heard another word from the police after that. By then, he probably had already destroyed or hidden whatever evidence was left. I was spending a long weekend at my uncle's cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. He'd built it himself back in the 80s. One of those places that looked small from the front but stretched out in the back, with wraparound porches, low tin roofs, and walls lined with dark wood. He let me stay there sometimes when I wanted to get away. It was supposed to be peaceful. That night, it wasn't. It had been raining all day, a thin mist rolling between the trees. But by sunset, the sky broke open, and the rain was pounding like nails on the roof. The closest neighbor was a mile downhill. No cell service unless you stood in the driveway with your phone tilted at just the right angle. This had been a decision my uncle had made, and one that I obviously respected. The cabin was like a sanctuary where bad news didn't reach. The mountains and the rain made everything sound even more magical. I guess it's kind of a universal experience to enjoy being warm inside when the outside world is in turmoil. Inside smelled like cedar and old ash from the fireplace. The power had already flickered twice, and I'd lit some candles just in case. It was the kind of night where you expect the power to go out. I sat on the couch, scrolling through old photos I'd downloaded. I'm a photographer by profession, and that trip to the cabin wasn't just to get some peace, but also a bit of inspiration for a photo shoot I'd been offered. The first thing that got me uneasy was the dog. My uncle's mutt, Penny, was usually dead asleep by 9, especially when my uncle wasn't around. She would stay quieter and not in the mood to play. But that night, she was sitting up near the sliding glass door, ears straight up, tail still. She wasn't barking. She wasn't even growling. Just staring out into the black backyard, like something was out there. When I was younger, I had a cat that in the worst moments would start staring at the walls or into the dark, like he could see something we couldn't. Penny reminded me of him, and I'll admit, I felt a slight shiver. Either way, it wasn't a reason to panic, so I got up, thinking maybe a deer or some other animal had wandered close, and slid the curtain back an inch. Nothing but trees, rain, and the faint glow of my reflection in the glass. But the moment I was about to close it again and go back to the couch, The security light on the back porch clicked on, which only happened if something moved out there. Once again, it could have been any number of animals. So even though I didn't love the idea, there was nothing to do but believe it was nothing serious. So I closed the curtain and sat back down. But Penny didn't move. She stayed in the exact same alert position. A few minutes later, the power cut. Dead quiet except for the rain hammering the roof. Like I said, this was totally expected. In fact, the candles had already been burning for a while, so I wasn't completely in the dark. There was some kind of draft inside the house. Probably a small crack in the wall. I didn't feel cold, but the candle flames wavered, creating all kinds of shadows on the walls. I grabbed the flashlight, clicked it on, and went to check the breaker box in the little hallway closet. The breakers were fine. The power was just out. Out of habit, I opened the back door to see if the porch light was still working off its battery. It was. But the porch itself wasn't empty anymore. There were boot prints in the wet wood leading from the steps to the sliding door I'd just peeked through. And they weren't mine. I swear the simple sight of them gave me a mini heart attack, and I needed a few seconds just to breathe properly again. I needed to stay calm, think concretely and practically. But the idea that whoever it was had been standing at that door terrified me. The cabin had incredibly weak walls. It was just old wood separating me and Penny from whoever was outside. I shut the door quietly, locked it, and killed the flashlight. I backed into the kitchen, trying to think. The only phone was in the guest room upstairs. Anyway, I don't even know why I wanted the phone. The police would take forever to get there. If they even came. I started up the stairs anyway, each step slow. Penny followed at my heels. Halfway up, I heard it. Wood cracking outside. Slow, deliberate steps on wet gravel. Whoever it was moving around the cabin now. I climbed the rest of the stairs, went into the room, and shut the door behind Penny. She was still alert, but looking at her gave me an instinctive fear. She was old, over 18 years, and clearly scared too. That somehow gave me strength. I wasn't just worried about what they could do to me anymore. I had to help Penny get out alive and live the rest of her days in peace. I went to get the shotgun my uncle kept under the bed, locked Penny in the room, and went back downstairs. Through the curtains, I saw the outside light turn on again and felt a stab of dread. I had hoped whoever it was would give up, but they were still there. Gathering courage, I pulled the curtain aside and looked the man on the other side straight in the eyes. We both had a weapon in our hands, both pointing it at each other. The only thing separating us was glass. Then the man, when he saw me, made some strange expression. He gave me a long look and then lowered his weapon. I didn't lower mine, but I asked him what he wanted. He clearly said something, but with the sound of the rain, I couldn't hear. Without lowering my gun, I opened just a crack of the window. The man asked me where the hell my uncle was, and added that if I wanted to stay alive, I'd better answer him. That question clearly left me perplexed, and I could only answer that he wasn't home. The man gave me another long look, and then everything happened too fast for me to process. He fired at the top of the glass, shattering it completely. The glass hit me, and with all the noise I threw myself to the floor, I couldn't tell if he'd actually shot me or not. I looked up, and he was already inside the cabin. I thought I was going to die, but he just punched me and ripped the gun from my hands. Then, he started running through the cabin, opening every door, until he found the one where Penny was. I could only beg him not to hurt her. He turned back until he was next to me again. He told me he'd be back for my uncle, then simply left through the same window he'd come in. When I regained some strength, I got up, put Penny in the car, and drove back to town to file a report. The police came with me, took my statement, and even made a sketch of the man I'd seen. I don't know what my uncle did. He never told me anything. But I know he recognized the man in that sketch. He just apologized and said the cabin would have to stay empty for a while. It's been 7 years since then, and he still hasn't told me a thing. Penny has since passed away, but she died in peace, in my uncle's other house. He never went back to the cabin again, at least as far as I know.